Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Nick, and I'm one of the events hosts here at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. Before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual and live events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social media channels via Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Today, though, we are thrilled to welcome Tiana Clark, Vanessa Friedman Shayla Lawson in conversation with Katherine D. Morgan, talking about the book Sex and the Single Woman. In May 1962, Helen Gurley Brown Sex and the Single Girl sent shockwaves through the United States, selling more than 2 million copies in 3 weeks. The book promoted the message that women's needs, ambition, and success during her single years could actually take precedence over the search for a husband. While much of Brown's advice is outdated and even offensive by today's standards, her central message remains relevant. In their exceptional anthology, Sex and the Single Woman, editors Eliza Smith and Haley Swanson bring together insights from many of today's leading feminist thinkers and writers to pay homage to Brown's original work and reinterpret it for a new generation. While addressing today's central issues from contraception and abortion to queer and trans womanhood, racial double standards, dating with disabilities, sexual consent, singlehood by choice, single parenting, and more, these contributors provide a much needed reckoning for this classic work. Today's event will include an audience Q&A, so please use the Q&A buttons at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to ask a question. As well, if someone else has typed a question you'd also like to know the answer to, please upvote that particular question by clicking the thumbs up button. Also, please support these authors and Powell's by purchasing a copy of this book from us. A link to buy Sex and the Single Woman will be shared in the chat a couple of times during this event. This event will feature a panel discussion with Sex and the Single Woman contributors Tiana Clark, Vanessa Friedman, and Shayla Lawson in conversation with our moderator for tonight, Katherine D. Morgan. Katherine is the author of the debut chapbook, No Self-Respecting Woman, whose work has been nominated for 2 of the Best of Net Awards and has appeared in the is forthcoming at Huffington Post, Bitch Media, Lit Hub, Rumpus, and Hello Giggles. Now, I'm going to turn it over for our wonderful Katherine for author introductions. Thank you, Katherine.
Of course. I almost had the urge to mute myself because I'm so used to being on the opposite side of this. So it's really nice to see myself in this role. Before we get started, I wanted to make a note where, obviously Nick mentioned the fact that, on the date of May 23rd, 1962, that the Sex and the Single Girl originally debuted. And then I feel like it'd be careless of me to mention that, on January 22nd, 1973, the Supreme Court ruled that women in the United States had a fundamental right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, which was abortion couldn't even be mentioned in the original Sex and the Single Girl because, it was illegal at that time. And, just a few weeks ago on June 24th, 2022, that same ruling was overturned, which effectively ends a woman's right to choose what happens to her own body in the case of pregnancy. And, so much of this book and so much of being a single woman is about the right to choose whether you're choosing, a conventional partner, if that's something you want to do, or something, whether you want to choose where you want to live. And so I feel like I have to mention the fact that, for, this generation or, millennials in general, that our, singlehood will most likely look a lot different than the singlehood of women who are coming after us because they will not have the same, right that we did. Oh, there you go. I did it. So we're going to start by some readings and then we'll dive into the conversation. The first reading will be by Vanessa Friedman. Let me scroll. As I scroll, like I had to have a computer. Vanessa Friedman is a queer dyke writer living in Portland, Oregon. She's the community editor at Autostraddle and a teaching artist with literary arts in 826 New York City. Her work has been published in Autostraddle, Nylon, Catapult, Shape, and elsewhere. And I have to mention that Vanessa is currently working on her first novel, which I am very excited about. All right, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Thanks for that introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? I am usually based in Portland, Oregon, but I'm currently based in a hotel room in Yonkers, New York. So I always get nervous about that traveling Wi-Fi. I am going to read a fisting scene. So if you have children with you, maybe just like, I don't know, decide if you want them to hear this or not. I did tell my mom and she decided not to come. So she was like, I'm very proud of you. And also I don't want to hear that. So think to yourself if you and the other people in your room would like to hear this. And I don't think you need any other context. I've been to A Camp, an annual gathering of 400 queer babes in Southern California, many times before. But in the past, I was always partnered. I spent my 20s in serial monogamous relationships. Now I'm almost 30, and I'm finally solo. On the last night of camp, there is a dance, and we're all teenagers again. So much of being queer is reliving milestones, trying to get it slightly more right than we did in our youth. I have a crush on everyone, but I have a particular crush on Noah. She's Jewish and wants to be a rabbi. She's obnoxious and butch. She's in her early 20s, but her dark hair is already peppered with silver strands, and she keeps it long on one side, buzzed short on the other. I tell her in passing, I like when butch babes pull my hair. I like when they do it and tell me I'm pretty. And I think, Jesus Christ, Vanessa, do we ever leave that childhood playground? Do we ever unlearn the problematic ways our mothers told us boys were flirting when they hurt us? But I also think, who cares? I do like it when butch babes pull my hair. Maybe it's the patriarchy, or maybe it just feels good. At the dance, I make out with Finn, I make out with Al, I make out with Molly, I make out with Rose, I make out with Jesse, I make out with Lou. I almost make out with Lou, actually, but Summer asks me not to, and I'm annoyed, but I listen because I love her and whatever. Your breakup tour is inspirational, Rose says in my ear, and her burnt red lipstick is still on my mouth, and I love her, and I wonder why I spent my 20s partnered. I wonder how much sex I will have in the future. I wonder why it took me so long to get here. I wonder what was stopping me. Near the end of the night, I'm dancing on stage, surrounded by my friends. My velvet snakeskin dress drenched in sweat and someone else's tequila, when Noah comes up behind me and pushes her body against mine. My ass meets her hips and her hand is in my hair. She tugs, not gently, and puts her mouth near my neck. Let's leave, she says, and we do. My body is still bruised from River's impact the week before. Noah's mouth tastes like she's been fucking someone else. We do not belong to each other. I love it. My desire lives like an object in my throat, like glitter on my skin. We get back to my room and we're alone. My dress comes off. She pushes me down. She straddles me. She pulls my hair. I'm wet. I want her. I want everything. She unbuttons her shirt, but leaves it on, leaves her sports bra in place, leaves her pants zipped and buttoned, finally takes off her boots and ties up her hair, but that's all. I'm naked on the bed now, on my knees. She asks if I want her to spank me, and I say yes. I beg. I say please. I am so good. She tells me so. I know it. I say thank you. She hits me again and again, her palm on my ass, and I say more, more, more. I say please. My brain unlocks and I don't have a single thought, just the bright hot pain on my ass that spreads through my cunt into my stomach. Please don't stop, I say, and she laughs. You're very good at this, she says. She puts 2 fingers inside me, then 3, then 4. I beg more. I roll my body over her fingers still inside me, take a deep breath, push down, open wide. She looks up at me. Holy shit, you're so hot. I grin. It feels so good. I can take more. We go slow, soon her whole fist in my cunt, soon her eyes wide. I love the way a butch dyke looks when her hand disappears inside me for the first time. Her whole face open, reverent, blessed, thankful. She fucks me hard for a long time, fucks me until we both need to stop to drink some water. Do you need anything? I ask, my body between her legs, my head resting on her bare stomach. She says no, says she's satisfied. Then she plays with my hair while telling me about misogyny in the Old Testament, teasing me about wanting to take home a nice Jewish boy. A few hours before breakfast, she says, I should go, and she does. Thank you.
I was like, if you have a glass of water or a glass of wine, you should drink it because I know that made a lot of people thirsty. I feel like that has to be talked about. Um, Next up, we have the fabulous Shayla Lawson. I like keep having everything in my background and I'm just like, where's the things I need? So bear with me for a split second. All right. Shayla Lawson is that bitch, which I feel like is a perfect way to start any bio. So keep that forever. Shayla Lawson is that bitch. You can find more words at their regular column for Bustle magazine or in their 2020 essay collection, This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope. I know we dropped a link in the chat to buy Shayla's book, so you should buy it 100%. It's one of my favorites. All right, Shayla, let's go.
All right, team. This is called The Straight Girl. In 7th grade, I pulled up a 17 magazine using my middle school library's coward catalog. In the issue, littered with homoerotic Tampax pillow fights and an ad for Delia's, an advice columnist answered a reader's question indexed under the topic, gay. Am I gay? The pull quote read, dead center of the page. I remember slinking into the orange-pilled cushions of the library couch, chest swarming hot with butterflies. I pulled the magazine tight around my face, fingers on the fold like a hair trigger, so I could easily switch to an article on Jonathan Taylor Thomas if any kids walked by. In the issue, an adult reporter asked him how he felt about being a teenage heartthrob and what special girl he was into, which JTT answered by talking about recipes he was working up at home with his new favorite spice, lemon pepper. But the adolescent sexual inquiry I was focused on read something like this. Hi, I'm 13. I like boys, but I get really turned on watching women in sex scenes from action movies. Does that make me gay? I was 12 and only allowed to see PG-13 movies with my mom, which was cool because she liked big budget action flicks where emotionally unavailable men blew things up. But awkward because these men would usually encounter really smoking, sweaty, independent women. They'd lustily throw each other on top of hotel walls while I covered my eyes so I wouldn't watch any of this adult content when I was actually shielding my face because I was worried that even in the dark she might catch the heat from my warm brown blush. I tried continually to pretend alongside the other girls that I had crushes on adult male celebrities like Denzel Washington, Will Smith, Brad Pitt, Joaquin Phoenix, but really I liked boys my own age. The middle brother in the Three Ninjas, a tall kid in the back of my Spanish class, a boy in my Bible study group, and most sexy older women. I read on. The 17 article was gracious and, I thought at the time, a bit progressive in that it very patiently described to the curious reader that although it was okay for her to be gay, simply getting turned on by hot women in action films probably meant nothing because all girls and women are so accustomed to responding to the male gaze that they can receive the same erotic response from seeing attractive women out of aesthetic appreciation for the female form. So that was that. I was straight for the next 20 years. I had my first kiss at 18 with a boy who wore flowers in his long hair. For the next few years, he would be my on-again, off-again boyfriend. I was a virgin, which explains a lot of the on-again, off-again, and would remain so until I married at 28. So many of my relationships with guys and friendships with girls maintain the same level of codependent intimacy. Holding hands, sharing stories, painting nails, and cuddling while listening to records. Only with boys would I plunge into the occasional makeout sessions or heavy petting experiments, but in the 90s, there was a lot of wiggle room for homoerotic behavior between women. On television, kissing, wrestling, and an absurd amount of intense eye contact with your BFF was just par for the course, as depicted in Seinfeld, Murphy Brown, My So-Called Life, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I would sneak snippets of these shows since my overprotective parents still expected me to watch only the Disney Channel, PBS, or daytime BET. From what I could gather through glimpses, popular 90s high school catchphrases, and an occasional commercial, shows portrayed feminine intimacies as seriously queer. Jordan Catalano, the depressed love interest in My So-Called Life, with his lipstick, eyeliner, and deeply pouty thumb bite when thinking about something important. Picturing him still gives me intense butch baby androgyny, genderqueer vibes. The scenes where Catalano obsessed Angela Chase and her bestie Rayanne Graff would try on makeup while feeling each other up, and Rayanne would talk about how firm Angela's mom's boobs were. Let's not play. All three of those kids were definitely thinking about knocking boots together. Then there was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The show eventually featured a bona fide bisexual character in a former teen werewolf lover, Willow. But before that, Buffy and fellow Slayer Faith would tussle to what I can only imagine as the titillation of all in the female appreciation persuasion. Only one problem. These examples were all white women. For them, experimenting with romantic fluidity during sexual development was normal, particularly for those who were thin or involved in cheerleading or at one point or another. However, Black girls who flirted with their sexual desires, seeing a wide skirt of possibility, didn't appear outside of Suge Avery and The Color Purple. And even when I saw Suge, I totally missed the point. They're not gay, they're just good friends, I remember telling a classmate in my late teens, trying to protect the two characters played by Whoopi Goldberg and Marvin Avery in the 80s film adaptation I watched on VHS. I'm not saying that this was everyone's world, but this was mine.
Ah, so beautiful, just so lovely. And last but certainly not least, we have Tiana Clark. Tiana Clark is the author of the poetry collection I Can't Talk About the Trees Without the Blood and Equilibrium, which was selected by for the 2016 Frost Place chapter book competition. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming from the New Yorker, the Atlantic Poetry Magazine, the Washington Post, and among others. Tiana Clark, take it away.
Thank you so much, Katherine, and to Powell's. I'm so honored to be reading with Vanessa and Shayla. Those were such wonderful excerpts. I'm going to be reading from my essay, Once a White Guy, from the book. It's kind of a lyric catalog essay. I'm going to read the first chunk, and then I'm going to read the end. Once a white guy I dated asked to see my brown beauties. It was high school, and I barely knew what my body could do. But on my best friend's waterbed, I felt the plastic undulation of the rolling mini tide swell. So I lifted my shirt the way one lifts a veil, except I didn't feel precious or expectant underneath. I felt othered and exposed, inspected by the microscope of his eyes. I was worried about the circumference of my cinnamon-colored areolae. He kissed and licked and played with my chest for what seemed like an hour. Were these my brown beauties? Or were they just boobs? Were my breasts also black like me? Was my body always a black body, or only when it had a white boy in high relief? Could it ever just be a body? Once a white guy pulled my weave so hard during sex that the thread broke across the woven track. I warned him to be careful with me. Once a white guy I was fucking asked me to make cornbread for dinner. I made a house slave joke in my head, laughing to myself. He asked what was funny, and I didn't want to answer because I didn't want him to think that all my thoughts were about race, though I'm probably thinking about it right now. And now, I'd been working on not censoring myself, so I told him the joke, and he looked at me the way someone looks at someone who always makes things about race. The first guy I ever slept with was a white guy. He said he had to wash his pillows after because my hair stunk, said it smelled burned like kindling. Once a white girl I dated said she wanted me to stop pressing my hair. She said I should feel comfortable to wear it natural in front of her, that she preferred my coils. We were in a club. It was loud and obnoxious. She was loud and obnoxious. She was yelling in my ear, "Stop burning your hair, stop burning your hair. I can smell the heat." Once I felt comfortable enough with a white guy to let him watch me wrap my hair at night. I didn't grow up doing it. My mom didn't do it and never showed me how to take care of my hair. She worked night shifts and I often put myself to bed. I think my aunt showed me once with almond oil, but I couldn't recreate it on my own. It wasn't until I went to an HBCU, to Tennessee State University, and attended a sleepover party for the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs that I learned. All the gorgeous Black girls lined up in the front mirrors in the large women's bathroom and wrapped their glossy Black hair with wide brushes and a long swooping motion, so much like the movement of a potter at a wheel, twirling and holding their heads on a tilted axis at strategic points until the hair was pinned in place, then wrapping it with a silk bonnet or scarf to mold and seal the shape overnight. I stared at them, trying to absorb the maneuvers for my own scalp. I stared at them the way the white guy stared at me, except his gaze was different, as if I were inside a National Geographic. After George Floyd's murder, the country was on fire. I was fucking this other white guy. It was a weird and dissonant time. So many white people were reaching out to check in and send apologies. White people sent me money and gifts. White people sent me long poems. White people told me long stories about the Black people in their lives. White people asked me to send them poems about Black pain. In bed, I asked the white guy what he was wrestling with racially. I fell asleep as he answered, and when I woke up, he was still talking. I confessed I missed a large chunk of his response. I mentioned this was a weary time for Black people and joked that he should give me a pass. I laughed. I can't remember if he did too. I once broke up with the white guy because he didn't want to vote for Obama. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. My first real kiss was in 6th grade with another white boy who everyone called Lil Chris. We were in the computer lab and supposed to be practicing typing without looking at the letters. I liked Chris. He wore wide cut JNCOs that were frayed at the hem, oversized shirts, and a wallet chain. He leaned over and opened his mouth. I obeyed. I remember his tongue felt like a dolphin dipping in and out of the ocean between our jaws. When we fastened our preteen mouths, my braces cut his bottom lip, spilling a little droplet, a blossom of bright blood. I was embarrassed that I'd hurt him. I'm gonna skip towards the end of the essay. Once a white guy I dated said that Black pussy tastes different. Once a white guy I dated said I was pretty for a Black girl. Once my therapist asked why I dated so many white guys, asked if it was about power or my dad or both. Maybe I'm searching for my father in the faces of men who might look like him, a mythic composite of white avatars. Is that okay to confess? Don't we all try to scratch that first need with another, newer need? Once I tasted myself to see, licked my own authority from the pad of my index finger, such slow electric honey, such Black resistant joy, such thunderous manna, such historical sway, such a feverish wonder, such gorgeous cream, such a jolt of pink and brown light, such a hard desire to be heard and seen and believed, of which I gave myself to me.
Okay. So my first question, and this is to everyone. I think, when you think about depictions of singlehood, you think about the grandscape. So you think about shows like Sex and the City, living single, things like people like that. And for me, it's really interesting to see exactly what every contributor, but especially you three, what moments of you chose to write about. And so my first question to all of you is whether what was it about what you depicted that you were okay, of all the stories I could tell about being single or being a person in this world, this is the story that I want to tell. And I'll start with Vanessa.
Sure, that's such a good question. I think, Katherine, we were talking earlier, will you remind me exactly how you referred to my essay?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, I made sure to take notes of everyone's essays because that's just how I do as a person, as a writer. And for Vanessa's essay, at the end, I said that it was maybe one of my favorite literary pieces about a hoe phase that has ever been written.
What an honor. Thank you. So yeah, I think a lot of times when the culture talks about being single, it's very boring, very flat, very boo-hoo, poor you, you cat lady at home. And I was having a very nice time at that moment in my life being single, and I wanted to write about it. I felt good, I felt hot, I felt free. And I felt excited, and I just thought, how cool to write an essay that shows all the fun stuff. And there are other pieces of my essay that get to some of the harder pieces of being single also that I didn't read. But I really did want to capture the way I felt that summer, which was mostly just like hot and good.
And then what about you, Tiana?
I love that, Vanessa. Yeah, I think for me, you know, I've been in poetry land for so long, and so essays are newer for me. But I think no matter what genre I'm writing in, whether it's a poem or an essay, I'm always wrestling with a question that I'm trying to answer, and I may not answer. But I think when Eliza and Haley reached out, I had already been thinking about this question that maybe got brought up in therapy of why I date so many white people. So not that I'm willing to psychoanalyze myself in front of all of you, but I think in the realm of the essay, I had read this Margaret Atwood essay that was a catalog essay. And always, I love when I see a piece of writing that gives me permission. And honestly, that was the first time I read an essay that was like a catalog lyric essay. And I'd been used to the catalog format in poetry, and my mind kind of indexes things this way. So I think I'd been collecting all these vignettes and moments with all these white people for a long time. So it's either going to be like a stand-up comedy bit or an essay. So it just happened to come out in this essay where I wanted to kind of braid and plait and twirl and kind of reckon with these vignettes and let them ricochet off of each other into that kind of final crescendo. So yeah, that was kind of my approach to the essay.
And Shayla?
Yeah, I mean, like, when I listen to Vanessa and Tiana's stories, I feel like they're missing the bit where, and maybe this didn't happen for y'all, but like, I sent 3 different possibilities, and this was the one that they chose. So it was one of those situations where Eliza and so like the other 2 options I pitched were kind of the stories that I'm used to telling about my dating life, and then this one ended up being the one that I'm not. And it was an interesting conundrum for me because I was really excited about it, especially because I've been holding on to that image of, you know, discovering my teenage queerness in a middle school library for so long. But when I picked up, I was reading Helen Gurley Brown's book simultaneously with studying some Baldwin for a lecture that I was supposed to do. And it was really interesting to me that at the same year, which I actually end up talking about in the book or later in the chapter that I read from, that in 1962, the same year that Helen Gurley Brown is calling lesbian sex cuckoo, James Baldwin is publishing Another Country and is talking about himself as a queer individual and not a gay or homosexual man, which I still to this day find pretty interesting in terms of the ways that we catalog, you know, the stories of surviving queerness in the world, and thinking about what it meant for even Baldwin to trouble the waters of a definition that was pretty, you know, held pretty tightly around like who he was. And in the same way that we think about this conversation of who's straight, I felt like it was nice that Baldwin was the person who led me to that examination of who's queer. That if Baldwin himself, who has defined the image of the homosexual male writer and Politico, in fact, repeatedly referred to himself in essays as queer, like corrected people. And I used to think, you know, it must have been because he was a man of his time, you know, and that he had problems with the idea of identifying fully with just being someone who loved men. And then I thought about myself, and I was like, I've been, you know, passing as a straight girl for so long, and I wanted to play with the ways that I had questioned, the ways that, you know, one of the most literate people of any century was defining their sexuality by setting the tone for kind of redefining mine, not for the people who know me very closely, but like for people who don't, because that was one of the things that came up for me in publishing major is this kind of idea that my life was queer light or bi-curious, as opposed to being able to identify me as a fully queer person. So it felt also, this essay collection felt like a great opportunity to continue to come out and to be an example to other people who feel like their sexuality is not enough in one way or another.
Perfect. Before I dive into the questions, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that you can submit a question at the bottom in the little question box so that all of our authors will be able to answer later. But speaking of which, for me, it was so interesting, Shayla, where you're talking about, discovering, the 17 magazine and later talking about, the impact that Baldwin had on you. And all I could think about while reading that part was about the fact that, in so many schools, they're, censoring the materials that are being read. And so my question was, with the censorship bans that are occurring in this country, there's a chance that teens and young adults won't be able to have that representation in literature. It'll be like a lot harder for them to find. And I want to know, what did it mean for you to read that advice column in the library? Was that the beginning of your questioning of your sexuality? And furthermore, do you think that your awakening would have been different otherwise?
I really want to answer the question that you didn't ask about banned books, which I think will tie into this. I think, I mean, I knew I was queer pretty much my whole life. If you go back, I mean, I loved Prince. I still carry around a Prince keychain. So recently I decided to change my pronouns. And I had to tell myself, bitch, you've been carrying around a male-female symbol for about 15 years. Who were you fooling? And I think when I think about the conversation of banned books, the reason why it's the first place that I go is I think some of the first places where I recognized a set of queerness around myself was the literature that I wasn't allowed to have. And so I actually think that it's tricky, but it's also kind of an interesting level of nuance and privilege to being a person whose book has been banned, because the fact that Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret was a banned book, or that The Bell Jar was a banned book, or that I'm just thinking of the books that were banned when I was growing up, like Giovanni's Room, it was the only thing I wanted to find. And it made it so easy for me to start finding myself on the page, because I was in the private places, I was in the margins. The teen magazine is just wonderfully imagistic. It was just this clear moment, the fact that I was actually searching for a definition, which I think that most of us have in our in our lexicon. If we're dealing with any kind of fluidity in our life, there's some moment where we try to look for a definition of who we were. But I think early on, my definition of who I was I was on the banned bookshelf. And those were the books that in my situation, thank God that the banned books list existed, because that was the place that I can go and oh, that's the stuff that I actually need to read. Those are the things that I need to find. And with kids having more access to the internet, having more access to resources outside of school, it's just going to have to be a time for us to step up and find ways to make those things more accessible, whether they be through independent bookstores or through channels that we set up ourselves, because it is a bit of a badge of honor to represent the future. We get banned when we represent the thing that they're afraid of us turning into in the future, which is a more whole version of ourselves. And yeah,
I feel like that's such a beautiful way to put it, because it's so, whether if you find yourself represented on the banned book, I feel like the first thought is oh, it's banned because it's bad. And it's no, it's banned because they're afraid of you becoming exactly who you're meant to be. And it's a whole different version. So I think that's a really beautiful way to put it. And that's what I'm going to start using whenever I reference banned books, especially as an employee as Powell's. But that's a really fantastic way of putting it. I love that so much. And let's see. Speaking of which, I'm going to slide it over to Tiana. Your essay made me laugh so hard because, as a person who dates a lot of white dudes, and my friends always kind of like, it's a running gag now where like all my boyfriends kind of fit a standard pattern. But while reading your essay, I was thinking of the ways that, like, dating for me, and dating for me, especially in Portland, and dating, like, there's a whole website where like Black women get together and we talk about how it feels to like be dating in, this a predominantly white city, but b dating as, a person on the apps with like, fetishization and like those like weird messages and things like that. And for me, I like was thinking about it because, if I try to tell my friends like how, my experiences on the apps, they kind of either their first thought is to not believe it, or their first thought is to kind of diminish it. And so I wanted to ask, like, so much of dating is being able to commiserate with your friends when things don't go the way you want them to. And, as a Black woman, your experiences are different than those in other races, especially including white women. And I want to know, like, while you were dating, did you feel comfortable sharing those experiences with them if they asked about them? And like, how did you frame them?
Oh my gosh, what an amazing question. I don't know, that question really sees me because I feel I was born in Los Angeles, but I moved to Nashville when I was 7, and I was actually married for a long time. So Vanessa, when you were talking about the host stage, after I got divorced, I had never really been in that. So I wanted to explore that, hence where the essay comes from. But no, I really appreciate your question because I feel like growing up in the South, also being mixed, though I identify as a Black woman, there's this way in which it's been hard for me I want to debunk the sad, tragic mulatto myth. And at the same time, there's ways that I think that my experiences have been this interlocutor kind of between these realms, that's been hard for me to translate with my friends. And so I think actually I would try to mention some things to friends, but it'd be if I was talking to a white friend or a Black friend, I think we all have those kind of friends, no matter what identity that you're with, like, which friend to go to for which kind of reaction. And so I think if like a white guy said something weird on the apps or something weird happened on a date, I would definitely know to go to like my Black girlfriends to have a certain kind of like camaraderie, right? And then I think certain things were translatable with like every person in my life. But I think that's why I like writing so much, is that often in my first drafts, I don't even really think about audience, but I think it's a way for me to have a conversation with myself, because I think there's been a lot of times where I have felt really isolated, or I don't know who to talk to about these experiences. And it's so interesting actually listening to Vanessa and Shayla, that if I had those essays when I was like younger, or just like when you mentioned like Delia's and Jordan Catalano, or just even some of the lexicon that you use, Vanessa, or like baby butch, or like I didn't even have those terms when I was like younger, and like what that would have meant to me. That's what I think I love about literature, is you feel less alone in the world. You have a poem or an essay or a short story that just completely sees you. And then I think we've like, I so resonated with what you said, Shayla, that I found myself in the margins or in the marginalia. And I think that's why I've held on to so many poets that feel like I have an intimate relationship with them, because I feel so seen in their words, and I want to create those spaces with my words. So I love what you said, Katherine, that you felt really maybe resonated or with those experiences, because it's awkward for me. I guess I'll be vulnerable and say that when you're a Black woman dating a white guys, all different directions, there can be heat. And so there's a way I wanted to enter it and talk about it by being honest and vulnerable, and also implicating myself, which I think is important, which is why I have like the therapy bit and the hashtag daddy issues. So I think I'll stop there because I'm just spiraling, and possibly might share more personal information. So thank you for the question.
Well, it's funny because then when I was also reading the essay, when you bring up the dad issues, that I wanted to make sure that I noted, I like underline the line, is that okay to confess? Don't we all try to scratch that first need with another newer need? And like my first thought was like, are we always seeking answers in the unfamiliar? Are we always trying to, are like when we date people, or when we like, become friends with people, are we searching for answers and like to the questions that we have about ourselves, and we're hoping that people fulfill that role? And so I like wanted to make sure when I underlined, I was like, yes, this, but I also underlined like I like laughed really hard when it was like, oh, I don't want to be like this guy's first Black girlfriend, but I also don't want to be like on a list of only. And I was just like, yes, because even like dating now, I'm like, have you dated Black people before? Like, do I have to go through the things? Can you let your parents know that I'm Black? Like, I was like, I don't want any surprises when they see me at Thanksgiving. Like, I was just like, we're not doing this. So I like wanted to make sure this is like this is why I love like this book, and especially like you three, because it's like, even if I didn't like fully identify with everything that was happening, I was just like, there was just something where I was just like, yes, like this is how I've been feeling. Where I was just like, this is hilarious. Like these are such funny people. So I just wanted to, note that as well. And then with Vanessa's piece, I have to just dive into like the beauty of it, because it's just so brilliant. And, for me, I wrote one of the note questions I wanted to ask was that in, one of the lines you use is that you say, like I've been saying no to myself for a really long time. I'm done with that now. Now I only have yes, please, thank you. Now I have a new story. And I wanted to ask, so much on the essay, of course, there is pleasure. And there's also, like creating the boundaries that you have with your ex. But I want to say so much of this essay speaks to, like having that denial. Okay, Portland, calm down. So much of the essay speaks to denying that part of the pleasure and realizing that you only want to say, yes, please, thank you from here on out. How freeing was that revelation for you? And how long did it take for you to act on that part?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I actually wrote an essay after this one for Autostraddle that was sort of about like how I claimed being thirsty as a way for like my whole life. And I referenced how in this piece I say like, I want everything. And I do think there was a long time in my 20s where I had like some really bad relationships and some relationships that sort of shifted what I thought I deserved or what it was okay to want. And I would make myself really small, or I would say like, oh, I don't need that, because I was coming at it as like being a caretaker or being who I thought my partner wanted to be, which was like partially their fault in the dynamic, but partially in retrospect, like also my work to be doing. You can't take up your space. You can't have the things you want if you're not even voicing them. So I do think that although the breakup I had right before sort of the time period of this essay wasn't my worst breakup, and like I don't think of that ex as abusive, like she wasn't, it just stopped working. And I do have like some exes who I do think of as abusive, but like that wasn't the context of this one. It was just that I'd been with her for so many years and none of my needs were being met. And I don't know if her needs were being met or not, because we like really stopped communicating. But I think the thing that made me feel powerful, the thing that made me feel like, okay, I'm telling a new story, is that I was definitely in this mindset when I broke up with this partner who sort of like I was with before the essay begins, where I was like, I will never have sex again if I leave this person, or like, I will never be loved again if I leave this person. And it wasn't intentional. I've never thought of myself as somebody with like low self-esteem. But we do, I do, I'll speak for myself, and maybe anecdotally some of my friends who have shared this feeling. I think no matter how strong you feel, no matter how confident you are, when you're really in it with somebody and you're not getting your needs met and it's bad and like it needs to be over, there sometimes is this really scary feeling of like, this is the last boat for me. Like if I dive into the ocean, that's it. I'm not gonna have kids. I'm not gonna have somebody to like decorate the house with. I'm not gonna have somebody who like ever wants to host the Jewish holidays with me. And that's not true, of course. But in my head, I was really getting wrapped up into that. And so you forget that when you end the thing that's not working for you, you suddenly have the option to have everything. And it's like, I ended this sexless relationship that I was in, and I started exploring like the kinky sex that I wanted to be having. And suddenly it was everywhere. And like, there's a line in the essay that I didn't read where I text one of my best friends and I'm like, LOL, don't worry, I'm still having sex. And she just texts me back with all these like eye roll emojis. And she was like, literally no one was worried about that except you. And I thought, okay, I get it now. This will never happen again. And then I got into a serious relationship after I wrote this essay. And the end was just like that again. All my friends were like, babe, this relationship is like really not working for you. And I was like, no, but like, if I break up with her, like, I'll never have this sexual dynamic again. Like, I'll never have someone who spoils me again. And I really like stayed in this terrible toxic dynamic 6 months longer than I should have, after I published this essay where I was like, don't do that again. And then I broke up with that person, and not to be sappy, but like, hi, babe, my girlfriend who's in the audience right now. I like then got to meet this person who I think I'm gonna marry. I mean, I'm gonna marry her. You know, and we have all of these things that my ex just couldn't give me because that wasn't what was happening. I feel like I'm rambling a little, but it is like, you know, oh, hi, babe. She said hi to me. Hi. You know, you can't have the things that you want if you're in the thing that is not right for you. And I think like we all kind of like lose sight of that a lot when we're in it. And then you get out of it and you're like, oh my God, if I was still in that like horrible spiral relationship, I would never have been single when this like weird, amazing, like sexy, perfect person for me was like, hey, I'm single and you're single, come over and watch Buffy, you know? So, and I don't know. I don't know if that answered the question. Now I'm like shy because I've been like telling my girlfriend I love her in front of all of you, and this is being recorded, but I do love her. She's perfect for me.
I can see like the scrolling of the panel, like it's the chat box, and everyone's just like, oh my God, like that's so nice. It's like, and I love that, because you're right. There's like, you know, including, you know, I don't know about all you three, and I don't want to, you know, assume anything, but I feel like, yes, like being single for me was absolutely wonderful. I was like, yes, I like had my single girl behavior and I was doing weird shit and I had my own whole phase. Sorry, pals, but I had my whole, you know, my own phase. And then there was that part where, you know, like if you go on like a date and you're like, the date was great, and then they like never texted you again, and you're like, oh, that's it. Like that was my one last chance at happiness. And it was like some lame dude who wore like, I don't know, khaki shorts, like being like, you were just like devastated because you were like, well, it's over, like I'm done, like it's in for me. And I think that, you know, that is a beautiful note to end on, because it's like, if you're still, like you said, if you're still in that situation, you aren't able to see that the beautiful life that you could have is like right around the corner, or, you know, within your grasp. And so I feel like that's a really good plot to end it on before we head into questions. I also feel like this was like so fast moving. Like whenever I'm like working these events, I'm always like, yeah, like there's an hour, you got time. And now I'm like, wait, no, like I want to hang out with you forever and spend all this time with you. And so let's get into questions. Sarah has a question for Tiana where it says, I have a craft question. Historically in your work, it seems that your speakers have a bit of distance from the reader. In your essay, I felt very little distance. To stress again from a craft standpoint, what informed your decision to have the speaker express herself this way?
Thank you, Sarah. I mean, I think for me in poetry, there's the lyric I, which is this collage of personal and imagined experiences. You know, I think a lot of people think poets are purely autobiographical, but we can lie. And there's like that cushy veil that's there. And I think with nonfiction, that veil has to be torn. And so I think for me, it's very scary, like that I is very exposed. And actually, in thinking about that, it makes me go back to your, you know, question, Katherine, too, that I think there's a way in which when you are a Black person dating a white person, there's a way that you feel seen or often hyper visible too. And so I think that there is a way in which like the voice that I had to have for this essay wanted to be seen and possibly like and implicated in that way. So I had to be honest, or like I approached the truth differently in my essays, or I'm working on it. It's still something I'm negotiating of like, what is the emotional truth? What is the real truth? Also, what are ways that I even want to protect myself and the truth I decide to share with my readers, even in a nonfiction format? I'm still learning. So if Shayla and Vanessa have tips on how to do that, please help me. But I think the voice is like, I think Mary Carr calls it like the, the writer's, vehicle delivery system. It's the writer's insights. And so I think with nonfiction, I'm trying to be as honest as I can with my readers, and to expose myself in a way that I'm also protecting myself. So I'm still trying to figure out that balance.
And then Julian really quickly wants to know, Tiana, you shared the name of a Margaret Atwood catalog piece that you mentioned, and she just wants to know. Oh, there you go. Look at it. You did it. Okay.
Julian. It's called The Female Body by Margaret Atwood. That was the catalog essay that gave me permission to be like, oh, like you can do this in an essay. You can kind of have a catalog. Hers is numbered, but I decided to take away my numbers. And actually, just a shout out Eliza and Haley. I actually had kind of more chronological, and they really helped me do the braiding and weaving, which is really great to have editors come in and have like that aerial view with structure, going back to craft. But sometimes that's the hardest part with me. The essays, there's so many moving parts, and I actually cut up the essay and had to like tactile, like rework it, especially with all the things that I was braiding. But working with Eliza and Haley was like so valuable for them to kind of help me with getting the chrysalis goo and help me with that.
Real quick, I want to ask you all this question where, Tiana, you just mentioned the fact that like this Margaret Atwood piece gave you like kind of the permission to write, like frame the essay in that way. And I was wondering for each of you, if you wanted to just quickly speak on is like what book or like what, it could be a book, it could be media in some form of way. What gave you either the permission to like say like, okay, like this is the person I can be, or like what gave you permission to, if you were like working on this essay or working on something else that like, along the lines, like what gave you the permission to say like, okay, like I didn't know I could do that this way before, but like now I realize that I can. And I want to start with Shayla.
To be honest, I did. I mean, like, and I don't say it's because like last week or a couple of weeks ago, I got to interview Raven Simone, and I say it out of like respect for the fact that one of the things that I appreciate about the interview is we had to ask that standard question of what was it that kept her out of all the Hollywood things, as a young person. And she said, I got to interview both her and her wife. So it was a piece in Romper, like covering queer families. And she mentioned the fact that, usually I give the standard stock answer that the thing that gave me permission was like having a really strong family. But it was me, and knowing that I was queer all the time and that there was a life out there for me that nobody else could imagine. And that was how I grew up. Nobody could imagine a life that I had to make for myself and I had to design. And I think especially, with the three of us being, like with all of us being queer people sitting here, like we've had to be our biggest role models, because even on the page, there's been so little representation for queer women. And, and on top of that, like for non-binary people, like the catalog is just beginning, for trans women, like we don't have the same library that we can go to and say, oh, this is the book that I want to pull down to learn how to write this essay. Each of us to write these essays had to teach ourselves.
So I just feel like that's such a like brilliant, like I'm just like, yes, like your bio was right. You really are that bitch. Like I was like, you really just walk in. Like I just want to like I want to leave the Zoom and just like sit and then like pause and be like, you're right. This is it. This is so great.
We can ascend now. Sun Ra, please beam us up.
Wait, Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't know that I can really follow Shayla's answer, but I will say, I always say all the queer writers who came before me are the people who gave me the permission. For me, Michelle T is a really huge influence. I will say Lydia Yuknovich's Chronology of Water is the book that helped me figure out how to write a sex scene. She has a scene with a threesome in it that's just like so rhythmic. And when I read that, I was like, oh, that's how you write a sex scene. And then also the year I wrote this essay, I actually wrote this essay like prior to the book. And then when I was talking with Haley and Eliza and they were talking about what they wanted to do, I was like, well, look at this essay I wrote, but if you don't want it, I get it. And they were like, no, we do. But I had just seen Shakira Diaz in conversation with, I honestly forget all the other writers because like she just like shone so brightly on the panel at AWP. And she was like, I am so sick of writing about dick. I just only want to write fisting scenes like for the rest of time. And I was like, what if everything I ever wrote for the rest of my life had a fisting scene in it? And I mean, I have since written things without fisting scenes tragically, but I was really in that moment at that time. And so definitely shout out to Shakira Diaz. I don't know that she necessarily knows that she changed my life that way, but she did.
I love that. And I, as someone who's read Shakira's book, we just dropped a link in the chat and everyone should read it. It's absolutely fantastic. I met her in person a few weeks ago and I literally like screamed. she was like, thank you. And I was like, you changed me. I'm a person now. And then Tiana.
I'll quickly also just agree with Shayla. I often say that I write to save my own life first. And if it happens to save somebody else, great. But I definitely, as you were talking, Shayla, it reminded me of Lucille Clifton's poem, like, won't you come celebrate with me, with that line of like, I've made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay. And that idea that it takes improvisation when you don't have those texts or when you don't have that model, right? And so when you don't see yourself in the traditional Western canon, you have to make your own canon, right? So I really resonated with that. And also I will say, when I was in high school, I had a really like retired beat hippie poet named Bill Brown who changed my life. And he had this like giant table with all these books that we could borrow. And there was Sharon Olds' Gold Cell. That was kind of like this shining beacon. And so at 15 years old, to open that book and to read Sharon Olds at 15 was like this, I mean, spiritual sexual awakening, a psychosexual awakening for my 15-year-old brain that completely exploded my whole body. I was like, wait a second. And I'd grown up in church. So, you know, I was only allowed to really like interact with like the Bible. And then here I had Sharon Olds, like showing me how to write about the body in the way that only she can write about the body, with these like muscular strophes that were so powerful and sensual and just beaming from the page. I was just like, I was forever changed from that moment of like, oh, here's this sacred text to me that is actually speaking to me and my 15-year-old self. That kind of became this like, I don't know, beautiful kind of glittering path of what was waiting before me.
And then before we go, I do want to ask Jordan's question, which was, thank you all so much for your gorgeous work and words. And, you know, I agree with that. Thank you so much for, you know, appearing on this and for allowing me the chance to talk to all of you. I wondered, Jordan wants to know, I wondered if you might speak to the experience, this is to all of you, to speak to the experience of being anthologized, particularly on this subject, if and when there's community and sharing literal space together in this book. So I will ask Vanessa to go.
Yeah, what a great question. I think I just felt so excited about being part of this anthology. Like every single name in the book, I was like, holy shit, you mean I'm going to be published like amongst these people? And some of them were brand new writers to me, and some of them were mentors of mine, and some of them were really dear friends of mine. And a couple I actually got to like recommend to Haley and Eliza, and I was like, you should check out this person's work. So just the idea of being like in this book with all of these powerhouse, amazing, strong voices about a subject that is really near and dear to my heart, of like just celebrating autonomy and like being in this world, feels very, very exciting to me. Feels like a gift to be in this anthology.
I remember when I was seeing about this anthology being published and I was like, I need this copy of this book. And then that part of me was like, oh, I wish I was in this book, just because I was like, I'm a millennial woman too. I have sex. It's like, it's a thing. Like, so I'm just like, I'm glad I have a copy. I'm very just like pleased with it. And then Shayla.
I think an ask to do this book is kind of the closest I've ever wanted to be to a basketball team. Like ever felt like, you know, just the moment where everybody's like cheering and they're coming out and they're like slapping each other on the ass. Like that's how I felt. Like look, I was like, you know, Minda's in here. I mean, Melissa's in here. Vanessa's in here. Tiana. Like it was just like this roster that felt kind of like when I was watching Space Jam and I watched like everybody come out onto the field. I was like, yes, aliens and basketball players, you know, like and Lola Bunny. Like I was just so excited to get to be a part of something that was this fun, and I think that's been the experience of being an anthology for me.
I feel like it might have been like that. Speaking of the Space Jam scene, I feel like it might have been like when you when you were like at a restaurant or something and you look up and you see a friend and you're like didn't know that friend was gonna be there. You're like, ah! And then you look again, you're like, ah! Like it's just like pointing out people. I feel like it's that too, where it's just like you decided to dine at the same restaurant I did at this exact moment. Like look at that friendship.
Imagine basketball and brunch. Like,
yes, brunch basketball. Ooh. And Tiana.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Vanessa and Shayla. It was an absolute gift. And I just felt so honored and grateful to be included. And when I saw the names too, I was just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I think for me, so much of the writing life can be lots of isolation. You're kind of in your own silo. And so I think to be in an anthology where you're kind of knitted together with these other voices. And then for me also to have this event, this is the first time I've had an opportunity to do something with the book. So when I saw Vanessa and Shayla's name, like in the email, I was like, an absolute like hell yes. You know, I want to celebrate this with them and to have this moment to kind of share together. So I absolutely kind of share just kind of in the wonder and gratitude and the joy.
All right, it is now 6:03, which means that our time has sadly come to an end, even though I could talk to you all about, not basketball because I don't play it, but about brunch, about just like what it's like to be, you know, in this phase in your life, because I think that, you know, the editors paint such a great portrait where it's like, you know, for so many people, yes, like singlehood is just, it can either be on the road to something or it's just a phase in your life where, you know, there's so many, you don't know how long you're going to be in it, you don't know where it's going to end, but it's just like such a beautiful time in your life to like discover who you are and to discover, you know, so many different aspects of yourself. So I want to thank you all for joining me, both the people in the crowd, both us three beautiful writers. Thanks to everyone who definitely zoomed in. I know that, you know, it's been like 2 years since the pandemic started, so everyone's probably just like, Zoom again? But I want to thank everyone so much for joining us, and everyone should immediately buy this book if you haven't. You know, it makes a great gift. You got your friend just broke up with her boyfriend, give her the book. She's dating 3 people at once, give her the book. Like there's just like, it's the perfect gift. Just give her the book. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to have Nick outro us out.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Tiana, Vanessa, Shayla, Catherine, thank you all so much for joining us today. And all of you out there, everyone zooming in, just it was wonderful to have you with us for this awesome conversation and all this and readings and all that. So we put a link in there, so definitely go and purchase a copy of Sex and the Single Woman. And it's a link there. And if you're on pals.com, check out our upcoming lineup of many awesome events that are coming in the next few weeks. And we look forward to seeing you at another one. So thank you all of you, all you readers and speakers. And we will, and have an excellent afternoon. Bye.